Hey folks, and welcome back to West Yorkshire Retro Gamer. Just wanted to have a look at the how the Premier League finished in the season just gone, and basically kind of look at whether any of the three promoted teams from the Championship have got any chance of staying up for the 25-26 season. Early on, the signs are bleak. The last two seasons now, the three teams who got promoted from the Championship have all come straight back down. And they've not just come straight back down, they've come down with an absolutely disgusting whimper. The gaps are humongous. And this then kind of begs the question, what do these three teams need to do to actually survive? That's what I'm going to just have a little look at today. So, as you can see, the Premier League finished, as you can see on screen there. Southampton, one of the worst performances in Premier League history, with a meagre 12 points. I mean, in the Championship, you know, you can win all your games in week 1 and be on 12 points. You know what I mean? It's crazy. A slightly better effort from Ipswich and Leicester, 22 and 25. But again, scoring under 30 points. And it wasn't that many years ago that it was seen as being 40 points would be the magic number to survive. The fact that would have been, 10 points less would have been comfortable, is a joke, quite frankly. And then you've got to look at some of the circumstances that have happened in the division. Again, only a few years ago, there used to be the Rich Six, who seemed to be in those top 6 positions on a fairly regular basis. And a couple of years ago, Chelsea were one of the first ones to kind of break that top 6 by finishing in the bottom half. They've since recovered somewhat and got back into the top 6. But in their place, both Man United and Tottenham have decided to finish in the bottom half, which again kind of breaks up the Rich Six. Now, when you look at it, as much as I cannot stand Man United or Tottenham Hotspur, the fact remains is that is two very large clubs in the scheme of things, that have finished 17th and 15th, and for a long time it looked as if it was going to be it looked like it was going to be 16th and 17th, with Man U basically scraping an extra place on goal difference. Now, again, there's a couple of other things to kind of look at here. Tottenham have finished 17th with only a -1 goal difference. It is very rare for a team that low to have a goal difference close to a positive. And it kind of explains really where Tottenham have gone wrong this season. I mean, losing 22 games is disgusting. It's not good at all, and it's not really that far off from how many losses Leicester and Ipswich got when you look at it. The big difference is Tottenham were able to win games, at least a few of them, whereas Leicester and Ipswich nowhere near. again, the points tally 38. I mean, Christ, 38 would have had you relegated a few seasons ago. Yeah, you'd have gone, and that would have been classed as going down without a going down with a whimper kind of thing. It wasn't seen as a particularly good score, and realistically shouldn't be seen as a particularly good score even now. And it's not, hence why they finished just one place above the relegation zone. But again, if Leeds, Sunderland and Burnley are going to have any chance of staying up, you need to then look at which teams might have a chance of not staying up. And when you have got clubs the size of Man United and Tottenham Hotspur who are going to have massive financial resources, you would think. You've got Daniel Levy, who is an extremely tight businessman in that he will drive the hardest bargain possible for any of the Tottenham players. Leeds are obviously trying to get Manor Solomon on a permanent deal. Leeds are looking at around 15 million. Spurs are going to want somewhere between 20 and 25, which is out of Leeds' budget. And is Solomon really worth 20 to 25? I'm not so sure. 15 I think would be a fair price. They drove an hard bargain for Rodon, but Leeds still pushed the boat out to get him and spent £10 million on Rodon. So we know how Tottenham work. In terms of Man United, I mean, when the Glazers were in charge, Christ, it was such a scummy situation, and I don't know what this Radcliffe fella's been like as an owner so far. For the new owner and the new manager in Amorim to have a season where up until pretty much the last game of the season you were destined to finish 16th. For as much as I would love to see Man United and Tottenham and Chelsea and Liverpool get relegated, because I can't stand any of those four, I would love to see all four of them drop out. It ain't going to happen. Not in my lifetime, I don't think. So you then have to look at which other clubs could have a chance of going down. So, who's been poor? Wolves. 20 losses. Not good. Over half your games lost. Minus 15 goal difference. Not good. 42 points, which, as I mentioned before, would have kept you up by a couple of points. Now it's kept you up. Oh God! Look at that gap. 25 to 42. It's ridiculous, isn't it? And for as bad as Wolves are, based on that context alone, just looking at their stats individually, they've won just under a third of their games and lost just over half of them. That kind of form would usually have you down in a relegation battle. West Ham, they've finished in double figures for both wins and draws. And while only winning 11, which is not amazing, it's still enough, because they backed it up with 10 draws and lost 17, which is, considerably less when you in the context, but they only scored them an extra point over Wolves. So at this point, you are looking at Wolves and West Ham. The next worst then were Everton, who were the only other club to score under 50, but they scored 48 points, and that gap between 25 points, but it's nearly double, for Christ's sake. and it was only good enough for 13th place for Everton. They finished on 11 wins, the same as West Ham. Quite a few extra draws in there. And so therefore 12 losses doesn't seem that bad in the scheme of things, does it? They didn't score a massive amount, but they weren't dreadful defensively. From Everton's point of view, they've brought Moyes back, and so therefore, probably brings a little bit more stability to the club. So there's a chance that Everton may well have a better season next season. Crystal Palace, perennial mid-table team, never usually look like they're going to go down, never usually look like they're going to trouble the top half. And again, that's proven to be the case here. 12th place, but they did win a trophy this season, so that gets them European football. So would the European football be a distraction? Is their squad good enough or big enough to cope with European football on top of the Premier League? It's a very steady, very decent amount of points that they've accumulated. 13 wins, 14 draws and only 11 losses. They've won and drawn more than they've lost. A dead even goal difference as well, with 51 of each. Which ironically Fulham have also finished the season on a break even, with 54 of each. So you could then argue that again they score a reasonable amount of goals, but they do concede. They do concede goals, with 51 and 54. Everton only conceded 44. It's quite a difference. And yet Everton still managed a minus goal difference, albeit only -2. And again, these points tallies start to creep up. You've got 53. There's a 5-point gap there between Everton and Palace. 5 points in the context of things. It's a fair gap, isn't it? It's a couple of wins. To exceed that, it's going to be so difficult. Have Bournemouth overachieved? They've clearly got a coach that knows what he's doing. Quite a young coach as well. He could get snapped up by anyone, maybe in La Liga, maybe outside of the likes of Real Madrid and Barcelona. All the other bigger teams outside of those two could well be interested in Iriola, and if they lose him, there's every chance that they're going to lose any of the star players that they've had for this season. Could that derail Bournemouth? They've finished 9th this season. Could they do what Leeds and Sheffield United did, where those two finished 9th and then had a couple of shocking seasons thereafter and eventually both got relegated? Do these three clubs need to hope that something like that happens to a club like Bournemouth? Brentford, they've been so steady, haven't they? They've been a very steady team since getting promoted from the Championship a few seasons ago. They've recruited well. They've heavily focused on the Scandinavian market, which has been very successful because they've been able to sign players cheaper than if you were focusing on British and Irish players, for example, where they always come with a British and Irish premium, as it were. But again, how long does that model succeed for? Before they need to start signing better players. But again, those seasons of consecutively being in the Premier League should give them the finances to be able to do so. Brighton, a little bit like Tottenham, they drive a massively hard bargain for when their players are to be sold. Ben White being one of the primary examples, who left for £50 million, I believe, in the end. And that was after they had a £20 million offer from Leeds rejected. It's crazy money. I think did Chelsea buy Caicedo from Brighton, and again something like 80 million quid. These are good players, but they ain't worth that much. But either way, Brighton's been able to do that, and they've been able to bring in a massive amount of money. And when you look at Brighton as well, Look at that point tally, 61 points. They've scored more than they've conceded. Still conceded a fair handful. With 59 conceded in 38, that's not amazing, but because they've scored 66, it gives them a positive 7 plus goal difference. Only losing 9 games in the entire season, which is better than what Newcastle, Aston Villa, Nottingham Forest, and then everyone below them. It's very, very difficult to beat Brighton. When you can keep your losses under double figures, you can have a good season, aren't you? It proves you're hard to beat. Nottingham Forest, several seasons struggling against relegation, and all of a sudden, they're up there. However, as we know, Nottingham Forest have spent a lot of money. And the number of players, good God, the number of players that they've had over these last few seasons since getting promoted is revolting, quite frankly. But again, that's the way that they've decided to do it. That Marianakis, the owner, he's very trigger happy in terms of buying players and then letting them go. And this has been in order to try and find the right squad to make them a top half team. And so in essence it's succeeded, but it's a very risky way of doing it. Again, a plus 12 goal difference is not shabby at all. 65 points. At one point they were in the top 3 or 4 for a lot of the season. Again, a little bit maybe like the Bournemouth situation. Is it going to be like a little bit like a one season wonder type situation, and that they absolutely capitulate going into next season? And then, with the top 6, you can't really see any of those top 6 having a mare next season. You just can't. They're all too established. Newcastle, all right, they're the only ones in the top 6. Oh no, sorry, Villa have as well, actually. But both Newcastle and Villa have absolutely completely recovered since their championship days. Chelsea have recovered after having that dodgy season a season or two ago. And the top 3 are the top 3. They don't have dodgy seasons. Not compared to, teams below them. You could argue that Man City have had a dodgy season this season because they've not won. And again, the overall amount of points scored, 84, 74 and 71 for the top 3, is not blistering by any stretch. So, yeah, it kind of makes you wonder about all this. Look at Liverpool. 41 goals conceded for a team that has finished top in a 38-game season is not amazing by any stretch of the imagination. Scoring 86 is very good, no doubt about that, and that's what's caused them to have a very, very nice 45 plus goal difference. 74 is good without being spectacular. But then a 10-point gap. It's not even close, is it? It's not even close. And, judging by that, it's because Arsenal have drawn too many. That difference of 5 wins and 5 draws is what's caused that 10-point gap. Arsenal have scored far less, but they conceded less, to be fair to them. So Arsenal's problems are not defensively, they obviously need some extra firepower. And that then could possibly pave the way for them to do far better. From a Man City point of view, scored slightly more than Arsenal, conceded slightly more than Arsenal, well, actually 10 goals, and got a lesser overall goal difference, so, 71 points, yeah, it is what it is, isn't it? Only 2 points clear of Chelsea, who are then only 3 points clear of both Newcastle and Aston Villa for that matter. And then Forest only 1 point back from there. So when you look at it all, really, Leeds, Sunderland, Burnley, you are literally relying on some teams having a mare, as well as obviously having to perform at a good enough level yourselves. I've always been of the opinion it doesn't matter if you win home or away because it's still only 3 points, whichever you do. But when you've got stadiums like Elland Road and Stadium of Light, they're a very good capacity. If they can get all of those fans in, and the proverbial 12th man, if you like, try and make yourselves hard to beat if you can. Look at the Brighton model there. Only losing 9 games. And 16 wins, 13 draws. It's a pretty good. That's maybe the kind of level to look at in a sense. If you can win and draw more than you can lose, you're going to be fine. Newcastle, Villa, and Forest all lost more than they drew, which is not necessarily that great. But they did obviously get plenty of wins. Newcastle in particular, being the first team, to get 20 wins or more. And then obviously the 3 above. So it's a tough one, isn't it? It's an absolute tough one. Wolves' form picked up as the season kind of came to an end, despite dropping below Man United. West Ham, they don't look amazing, do they? Really? They've had. Was it Moyes and Potter for the season? I can't even remember now. Or was it Lopetegui? I can't even remember now. I've not really followed the Premier League last season, but ultimately they've had 2 different managers of pretty high calibre and with a fairly decent squad, and not done amazing by any stretch. The first task for these 3 promoted teams is to bridge that gap as much as they can. It proves that if you get 40 points, you're staying up. So how close to 40 can you get? Where are those 40 points going to come from? And so you kind of look at all this, and imagine if you went the entire season where you didn't lose a game, but at the same time you drew. For example, if a team drew all of theirs and got 38 points, even that would have been enough to stay up, because you would have had a break-even goal difference, which would have put you ahead of Tottenham. Albeit by 1 goal, which is crazy. But you'd have finished on 38 points. Now, no team has ever done that. No team has ever drawn all 38 games, not as far as I'm aware. But could that be the benchmark though? If you can't win, Farker in the Championship at Leeds always said that if you can't win the match, make sure you don't lose it. And maybe that has to be the mantra, for this up and coming season. Just avoid getting all them losses. Look at the losses column. For Wolves, Tottenham, Leicester, Ipswich and Southampton. They are terrible. They're really bad. Apologies for the dings there. It's really not good. So, in essence, if you can try and minimise those losses as much as possible, it's literally going to be a case of every point is going to count. You've got to, you look at that, 12 rubbish. that could be one of the worst performances of any team in any division this season, and that's right across the footballing pyramid. 22, that ain't gonna do anything. Neither's 25. If you're not getting at least a point a game, you're screwed. So that gap, immediately, that's the first thing that stands out for me. You have got to close that gap. If teams went down on 38 points, you'd be like, all right, okay, that's just like how it was a few seasons ago, where if you scored 40, you stayed up, and if you didn't score at least 40, you went down. But they were going down with at least 30 points. It might have been like 30, 35 and 38 or whatever. That tended to be the trend. But it's so different now. That gulf in quality and the gulf in the number of points is humongous. So something's got to change. So that, for me, I think that the key for Leeds United, Sunderland and Burnley has got to be the recruitment. And you've got to bear in mind that there is a PSR restriction for the 3 teams coming up, which ultimately puts them in a financial disadvantage compared to the other 17 more established clubs who have already had repetitive money by playing in the Premier League, for those consecutive seasons. Again, apologies for the dings that are coming through here. Should have turned those off, but I'm too far through the video now to start over again. And I don't know how to edit those dings out. Yeah, there we go. So I'm probably going to bring this video to a close, being as all the dings are starting to come through. Yeah, for me it's the recruitment. They have to be very, very savvy about who they buy. So, when you look at Leeds, they had the second best defence in the Championship, only conceding 30. That probably, even if you went as far as saying, right, well, Leeds might concede 60. If Leeds concede 60 goals in 38 games, again, apologies for the dings, then Leeds, compared to this current season, if they concede 60 goals, would actually better both Wolves and Tottenham. And obviously the bottom 3 for the season just gone. So that might not be too bad. They scored 95. Now, if you kind of chop that down, if you halved it, then Leeds are going to score, well, even if Leeds score 50 goals, should we say, near enough half, then that would give them a -10. Scoring 50 goals would be pretty decent, actually. It'd be more than Man United, West Ham and Everton. Not quite as many as Wolves or Tottenham. And it would ultimately give Leeds a -10 goal difference, which again is not disastrous in the scheme of things. It's in and around what some of those, like Man United finished with a -10. It's better than what Wolves finished on. Spurs, to be fair, them only had a -1, which is rare for being that low. But it beats West Ham, it levels Man United, and it beats Wolves. Now, again, it's like, if you're going to score 50 goals in 38 games, that means you've got to score, on average, at least 1 against every team, and then some on top of that. So who are you going to score 2 goals against in any game? One thing that might be key for these teams, Leeds, Sunderland and Burnley, is if they beat the other 2. So if Leeds do the double on Sunderland and the double on Burnley, that's 4 wins already. So that's your that's your first task. I'm merely just saying that because I'm a Leeds fan. So, if Leeds were to beat Burnley and Sunderland to do the double over them, that's a key area. You would then be looking at getting something against the likes. Again, apologies for the dings. You're then looking at getting something against Wolves, West Ham, Everton, Palace, Fulham, Brentford, Bournemouth, maybe Brighton and Forest. I think you can discount the top six. I think they'll be too difficult. But as I said before, look at Brighton, who only lost 9 games all season. I mean, you might squeeze a draw. Maybe. A lot of this is going to be down to recruitment. Can Palace deal with the rigours of European football? Will that derail their Premier League season? Could do. But then playing in Europe, they might be able to attract better players to be able to enhance their squad. As I say, Everton are going to be more stable with Moyes there now. West Ham, they could be a little bit chaotic. I mean, if Potter gets a pre-season and a summer transfer window, then maybe that goes in West Ham's favour, and then Potter can try and work his magic on them. I mean, you can't rule out Man United and Tottenham having another duff season. What have they done this season to prove that they're going to be good enough for the top half? For even the top half. They haven't shown anything. Tottenham have won the Europa League against Man United, ironically. But they have been 2 of the worst teams in the Premier League this season. Whichever way you look at it. A lot of work has got to be done. I honestly think there's going to be a lot of ins and outs with Man United and Tottenham Hotspur this season. Like, player-wise, I think it's going to be an absolute mass overhaul. Because do you really want to rely on the 2 squads that they've got there, based on finishing as bad as they have done? I'm not so certain on that one. I mean, look at their form. I mean, it's weird. I thought Wolves' form improved towards the end of the season, but clearly it didn't. Not according to that, anyway. So I don't know where I got that information from. Maybe it was just before those final 5 games. Perhaps, I'm not sure. I mean, look at Liverpool's form. Last 5 games of the season. Not amazing, is it, by any stretch? Arsenal's was okay. You got to look to Man City, for the best form of the bunch up at the top there. But yeah, this is going to be tough. So I think the couple of key points here to conclude. You've got to beat the 2 teams that you come up with, both home and away. That to me is crucial. Again, apologies for the dings. That's going to be absolutely massively crucial. You have to, from Leeds' perspective, they've got to beat Sunderland home and away. They've got to beat Burnley home and away. Have to have any chance. Right, you've got to look at where you're going to get your points from. Then you've got to try get something against those that are outside of the in my opinion, those outside of the current top 6. Because as I say, the so-called big 6 or rich 6, they're done for now, at least. You've got to go back a couple of seasons now to when that 6 were the top 6. And maybe it gives some of the other teams in the division confidence to say, right, you know what, we've been to Man United, we've been to Tottenham, and guess what, we've beaten them, or we've drawn against them. It proved. I mean, and at the end of the day, like, all the players and all the staff and everyone, they're all human. They're not perfect. Some of them are extremely good at their craft. Right, let's not beat around the bush. But they're not unbeatable. Look at Liverpool. Won the league. Oh, guess what? They lost 4 games and drew 9. They didn't do an Arsenal. They didn't do an Invincibles where they didn't lose. And that hasn't happened since either. Even with the dominance that Man City have shown in recent seasons. Bar this one just gone. They never did an Invincibles season. They can be beat. Or at the very least they can be drawn against. But you've got to get everything right on the day. You know, you've got to get your tactics right, you've got to get your team selection right, you've got to hope that you haven't got any injuries or suspensions to your key players. And then you need a little bit of luck. Because, you know, that top 6 will be pretty dominant most of the time. So if you almost see that top 6 as a bit of a write-off and a bit of a free hit, you're then looking at those other teams, and you've got to hope that there is some kind of a slip up somewhere down the line. But I would go with the policy that Farker tends to go with, that if you can't win the game, make sure you don't lose it. And I think that's going to be even more important in the Premier League for these 3 teams coming up. You know, a draw is going to be better than a loss. Every single point is going to be absolutely priceless. Because look at the lack of points from those 3 going down. It's terrible. You know, it's so bleak. And the season before wasn't that much better, was it? I don't think. I mean, it was still the 3 teams that went up that came down, but I think they all scored more than this. So they've got to find a way. The recruitment has got to be so on point, so on point. You know, the players that are brought in. You know, like from a championship perspective, Leeds bought in Outanaka for £3 million. Now, if you can find some bargains, you know, that are going to work. You know, when they bought Rafinha for 17 million, and look at him now, he's a Ballon d'Or contender and wasn't a million miles away from winning the Champions League either. You know, just a couple of games short. But what a season Rafinha is having now. You know, he's a fully fledged Brazilian international. He's one of the best attacking players in the world, and he spent some time at Leeds United. You know, so, you know, if there are any other gems that are kind of coming through that aren't playing for one of the bigger clubs, I think Leeds bought him from Rennes in France, if I remember right. You know, so if the 3 clubs coming up can find some gems like that, you know, maybe that could be the key to it all. You know, it doesn't look great in the sense that Leeds had the top scorer in the Championship, but he only got 19 goals, did Joe Pirro. He was very hit and miss. Brilliant when he was on form, but he did have patches where he didn't score. You know, Leeds are going to need a better striker than that. You know, Burnley, fantastic defence, but have they got anyone up front that can even nick him a goal? Not brilliantly. You know, Brownhill, who's a midfielder, or a number 10 if you like, or unconventional number 10, he was one of their top scorers, if not their top scorer. Well, that ain't going to do it for Burnley, is it? They're going to have to go out and get some kind of striker that knows where the back of the net is. You know, Sunderland, their squad is so young, it's so inexperienced. Now, you know, it's like what Alan Hansen said once, isn't it? If you're good enough, you're old enough. But with how the league has developed since he came out with that phrase, Sunderland have got no experience in that squad. You know, they're going to have to get some seasoned professionals in there to give them a bit of guidance. You know, the youth and exuberance will certainly get them through certain portions of the season, but it ain't going to be enough overall, is it? So for me, the recruitment of these 3 teams is massive. Absolutely massive. Do I think any of the 3 can stay up? I mean, head over heart, no. Heart overhead, Leeds. I mean, if Leeds finished in 17th on goal difference, I'd take it. I don't care. I just want to stay up, because if any of these three teams stay up, then it gives them a chance. It gives them a chance to then establish themselves in the Premier League. They get the extra money that the Premier League provides at that point. You're not having to lose half of your best players, through getting relegated again and having to rebuild again. So that's my take on it. So big thank you for watching. Do please hit the like button. Do please give your opinions in the comments down below. Can any of these three teams realistically survive the 25-26 season and stay in the Premier League? That's the question. So I'll leave that with you folks. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day. See you in the next stream. Bye for now.